So we've rounded off our discussion on planning stakeholder engagement. So now let's look at how you'd plan business analysis governance. So I have this funny image that I use to showcase what lack of governance can mean in an organization. So in this image, you'd see two people discussing, right? What looks like a new staff. So the lady in this case may be new. Let's assume she's new, a new employee. And you have an old employee that is supposed to be a leader. And he's saying, the trouble with this company is nobody wants to accept responsibility for anything. But don't tell anyone I said that. Who can see the irony in his statement?
He doesn't also want to accept responsibility for what he said.
Exactly. In planning business analysis governance, what the BA is trying to understand is how should decisions be made? Who will be responsible for the decisions that are made? Right? When the time arises to make decisions. Okay. So the BA is going to be eliciting requirements, he's going to be doing designs, he's going to be involved in several things. And you are dealing with stakeholders that may have conflicting priorities. So stakeholder A may want you to do a particular thing first, and stakeholder B wants something else first in your software development lifecycle. How do you decide what to do? The BA is not there to make these decisions. The BA is there to support these stakeholders, right? To help them achieve their business goals. So there has to be someone in business, someone in that organization that can make decisions, that can give the final say when there are roadblocks, when there are conflicting choices. And that's what this part of planning is about. So the BA has to anticipate that issues may arise. So he needs to look at the organization and begin to plan out how will decisions be made if issues arise. Okay. So it starts by the BA, the business analyst, understanding the decision-making process of the organization. Right. And the goal here is that the BA wants to know what would happen when teams cannot reach a consensus, when they are not agreeing, right? How do I handle it? Who do I escalate to? Okay, so who is the person holding the final decision-making authority in this organization? So the assumption here is you may be a new BA to an organization, or you may even be like a consultant BA, right? Where you have your own organization, maybe an organization you own. Maybe you start a BA company after this course and you decide to offer your services as a contractor, or you are working for a consulting agency like Accenture, KPMG, and all those other what we call Big Four or Big Five here. And so in these cases, you'll be sent out to go consult, to go work with other organizations. And you have to plan out how business analysis activities will be carried out before you embark on delivering any solution, right? Before you embark on the processes of delivering any solution. So one of the things you need to plan out is, okay, I'm in this new environment. If decisions need to be made, who has the final decision-making authority? If there are gridlocks, who should I go to? Who do I talk to? Another thing the BA needs to consider is changes may be required in their projects. Changes may be required when the project has started, when the SDLC has started. And in this case, of course, initiation phase, it has started, but we haven't started developing anything. We haven't started eliciting requirements beyond the business requirements, which happens in the strategy phase, right? So in the strategy phase, we get the business need, we get the, what's it called, the problem statement. Okay, so in the strategy phase is where we get that business need, right? The problem statement. And that gives us sort of insight into what the business wants, so the business requirement. That's where that begins. And we'll continue to refine it and make it more objective, but that's the source. So we haven't really started any development activity here, or even eliciting stakeholder requirements and all the other pieces that will go into developing a solution. But when we actually start developing, it is not uncommon for new requirements to come up, for new changes, new requests from different stakeholders to come up. And there has to be a process for that. So the business analyst should plan out the process. How will changes be requested? Right? So if anyone is proposing changes, what are the steps? You have to define it. So do you want to create a form where they have to fill out the form to request the change? Right? Which requirements can they even request changes on? Or which designs can they request changes on? And which designs are out of reach to anybody? Right? So these are decisions you need to make before the project starts. Okay. When can changes be proposed? Who can propose these changes? How will they communicate the changes? So you need to already be thinking about all these things and possible creating a process for them to show. And this would help you even as the business analyst in charge, right? To show that you are organized. Nobody's just doing anything anyhow once your project starts. Now, this is particularly important whether you're using a waterfall approach or an agile approach, right? At the end of the day, regardless of the approach you are using, the goal is to deliver a solution, right? And if you remember the example I gave about building a house with either waterfall or agile, the end goal is that you have a complete building where you can live, you can dwell. So regardless of the approach, the goal is the same. It's just the way we are going about it that is different. Now, for the waterfall, you need to clearly state how changes should be requested, who can request these changes, when they can request these changes, because the waterfall model does not encourage changes. So it is even more necessary in that approach than in the agile, which, as the name sounds, as the name means, agility, right? Ruggedness. You are welcoming of changes. In the waterfall, you are not welcoming of changes, because once you finish with a stakeholder, that you are done with that stakeholder, you have moved to another phase. You are not supposed to have any contact per se with that stakeholder anymore. So you want to make sure anything that is causing you to go back has to be meaningful. So these are the kind of considerations you would have here. You would also determine or plan out how changes will be prioritized. there may be many changes. Different departments, different managers, different people, different stakeholders may request changes. Which ones will we do first? Okay, so that's prioritization. You have to determine that. Okay, you have to determine how you document changes. Okay, how will you document the changes? Will you use those changes to replace the original requirements, or will you store them separately? How will you connect them to the original requirements so you can know that they are updates or updated requirements? So these are not things anybody will particularly teach you. You have to plan out. How will I do this? How will I organize? Because you're organizing it for yourself and for your organization. In case tomorrow somebody comes, no one is going to need your resources or say these kinds of work product. But somebody may come tomorrow to ask questions about, okay, who requested this change? Why did we make this change? You, for your own good, need to be able to trace out who requested a change, why the change was requested, right? Who approved it, and all those other criteria or information they may need. So you need to figure out, how will I store or document changes in such a way that I can understand, I can go back to. In figuring this out, you would also look at your environment, the other BAs, right? How are they documenting changes? How is your organization documenting changes? Because you want to make sure you are conforming to what your organization is doing. Right? So how are they documenting changes? If you can suggest improvement, fine. If you can't, then it makes sense to follow the status quo, to follow how things are being done, as long as it makes sense and it's working. So you also want to determine how proposed changes, changes under review, approved changes, declined changes, or deferred changes will be communicated to the stakeholders that requested them. So when changes are proposed, if they are approved, how will you communicate to the stakeholders that requested them? How will you communicate to all the stakeholders involved, in fact, so they know that this change is coming, it has been approved? If the change is declined, how do you plan to communicate it to your stakeholder? If it's deferred, meaning if it's put in the parking lot, and you hear this a lot, right? It's a common BA jargon or product management jargon. Things we don't want to do now, or things that are not necessary for this increment, for whatever minimum viable product we're trying to produce now, we can put in the parking lot. So requirements that we don't have to meet now, we put them in a parking lot, meaning later we can go and look at them. They are not necessary now. So still on the change control process, one of the key things which change requesting changes is someone has to do impact analysis for your change. There was an example I mentioned in one of our classes. I said, imagine if you find out that the engine you used for a car is the wrong size, is the wrong type of engine, right? Now, change can be that way too, where someone is requesting, or you are building a car. Let's say you are the BA in charge of building a car, and someone is requesting a particular type of engine different from the one you originally designed the car for. So one of the stakeholders has said, oh yes, you are the BA in charge of building this car. There's this new release of engine that just came out, and that's what we want to use. I know we specified before that we're going to use an older engine, but we're changing our mind. We want our car to be competitive. We want it to do well in the market when we release it. So this is the new engine. Now, someone has to do impact analysis of that change. This new engine, if it's not the same size or the same specs as the previous one that we plan to use, how will the new engine affect our design? How will it affect the weight of the car, the stability of the car, the shape of the car, and so on? Right? So that is impact analysis. You are analyzing the potential impact of that change. And that would help, that would inform you, that will help guide whatever advice you want to give to the stakeholders on whether that change is something that is feasible and the costs or the consequences of the change, if they should embark on it. So you have to determine who will perform this impact analysis. Are you going to be the one? Do you have another BA? Do you have do you need someone that has technical skills in that area? So these are the considerations you should have. That if they bring a change, who will do impact analysis? Then you also need to consider who would authorize changes. So if this director comes and says, we need to change this in the solution, who will authorize it? Right. So the BA needs to already be thinking about all this and be identifying the stakeholders. You see why stakeholder analysis is important, right? Your power interest grid, and just reading your environment, doing all the using all the other techniques, right? Business rule analysis, brainstorming with your core group, other BAs, other senior BAs, your SME, your subject matter expert, your sponsor, to identify who are the people in authority in this organization. So who would authorize changes? You need to already know those people before you start your project. It's not when issues arise that you start running about and trying to set up a brainstorming meeting to figure out who you should go and meet and all that. You should have done all those things and identified all those key stakeholders, all those key actors before the project starts. Then another part of planning is you have to plan how you prioritize requirements and designs. How will you prioritize requirements and designs? In the next knowledge area, we will learn about requirements and the different types of requirements. You see, the business need is just the framework for one requirement. That's the key requirement, right? But ideally, you have to go and meet all the stakeholders, all those people who will be impacted or who want to cause the change, and ask them for their own requirements, right? And gather their requirements. Now, how do you know which of those requirements to do first? That's prioritization. So you need to determine how you would prioritize requirements. What approach would you use? How do you determine which requirement is the most important for the organization and which is next and which comes after that and so on and so forth? You also need to plan for the formality and rigor of the prioritization process. So how formal is the process going to be? How rigorous is it going to be? How thorough would it need to be? Who are the people that would need to be seated there? How would you present the requirement? Right? So people seated, participants. How will you present the requirement? In some cases, for example, in the agile approach, it may just be that you call up a meeting and the key stakeholders are there, the product manager or product owner. In agile, the key person that is representing business will be the product owner. Then you have the developers, and you may have somebody from security, somebody from testing, and you table the requirements down and you prioritize it there. Say, okay, the product owner is representing business, so he knows what is best for business right now and can say, yes, this is the requirement we're doing first. this is what we're doing second. In fact, there is a pre-planning meeting, which we call the Three Amigo meeting. What is expected is that the product owner, the BA, and usually the Scrum Master. In some cases, even though it's called Three Amigo, in some cases, you may have the lead developer there. Right? But this is the Three Amigos. They'll come together to prioritize the requirements. This is in Agile. Waterfall doesn't have anything like this. So this is for organizations using the Agile approach. Okay. They'll come to plan out or to prioritize the requirements. Okay. So the BA already in the planning phase, in this initiation phase, should be thinking about who will prioritize requirements, how will requirements be prioritized, what level of formality will go into the process. If it's Agile, then it's just discussions, meeting. If it's waterfall, you may need documentation. You may need to explain why you prioritize a certain way. You may need to get someone to sign, to put word signature, if possible, on the prioritization you have done, to say, okay, we agree, this is the way we want to do it. Then you need to plan for approvals. How will requirements be approved? How will designs be approved? Right? When will we need to meet for approvals? What will be the process to follow to gain these approvals? Who will approve requirements and design? Where will they approve these requirements and design? So these are considerations that the BA needs to make before starting the process of even going to look for these actual stakeholders to start collecting requirements from them, or analyzing any requirement, or designing anything, or developing anything. You need to already know how you manage changes, how you prioritize your requirements, and how is decision made in this organization. Who would approve things? Who will settle disputes when disputes occur? Right? Who do we go to when we need to make a decision concerning this organization? Right? Concerning this project, concerning this product. It may not be the CEO. Okay? Many times, again, if you're in an agile environment, the product owner is the person playing that role. Sometimes, though, the BA is the product owner. And in that case, this becomes very essential for the BA. Right? If the BA is the product owner, then the BA should have planned this out before even coming out to say, okay, developers gather together, we want to do this, we want to do that. Should have planned all this, who to go to if they have questions. Right? So because everybody will be looking at them for answers. Everybody will be looking at the product owner for answers. The product owner needs to know where they can get their own answers from. Okay. So we'll talk about Agile in greater detail later. That's an entire section for this course. And we'll talk about the Agile roles, right? But for now, what's important is that you know that there are two approaches to delivering your solutions. Two approaches to delivering your solutions. The traditional approach, which is waterfall. So waterfall is an example. Then you have your adaptive or agile. At this point, I should mention that some organizations use a mix of both. Hybrid approach, which some people have nicknamed WAGA, so waterfall and agile plus agile. But officially it's called the hybrid approach, where some of the things you follow the traditional method. So some of the things you would do in your project will follow documentation, seeking approval, getting signatures on things, getting sign off on things. And some of the other things will be development, will be agile. So it may be the development part of your SDLC, you use agile. But for the requirement analysis and all those phases that require documentation sometimes, you can use waterfall. So organizations that don't want to go pure agile use an hybrid approach. And they don't want to go pure waterfall. Okay. But generally, these are the two approaches, 1 and 2, the traditional waterfall, plan-driven, predictive, whatever name you call it. Again, don't forget, waterfall is just the most popular example of the traditional or plan-driven or predictive approach. They mean the same thing. Waterfall is just the most popular example, the key example. Okay. Then there are several examples of agile, but we'll talk about one key type of agile approach, which is Scrum, but that's later. Okay, so the BA has to plan who would approve, where approval will occur, and timing of approvals. How? Brainstorming is your friend, right? So brainstorm the people you met there, the people in the organization that are working with you. So other BAs, your SME, subject matter expert, right? The domain subject matter expert. So he knows that problem domain. Ask that person questions. Your sponsor, the person championing the project, brainstorm with them to know what are the things we would need to prioritize. Who should we meet if we need to make decisions? If there are issues, if there are decisions to be made, who should we meet? What are their names? You should document all those so that when your project starts and issues arise, you already know who to call. Okay. Document analysis can help you too. Many organizations keep records of what they have done before, right? So you can review these documents to figure out who to go to. Organizational charts can help you. Interviews, you can sit with some of the key stakeholders, the core people in your project group. And as you discuss with them and ask questions, you can ask questions about who to go to, who makes decisions about issues, right? So you can interview people. Lesson learned is another thing, is another technique that is very useful here. So if there are BAs that have done things before you, that have done project for that organization before you, right, then you can read their notes, which we call lesson learned. Because after every phase, a BA is supposed to document what they are learning, what went well, what did not go well, right? So that they can adjust for the next iteration or for the next increment or for the next phase, right? So for the next set of activities they are doing, they are supposed to adjust. But in order to adjust, you have to document what went well, what did not go well. So you can read those types of documentations to get what has happened with other BAs, what went well, who did they consult when there were issues, right? How did they maneuver those issues? How were they able to overcome those issues? And those lessons learned can serve as guidance for you. Okay. So a BA has to plan, business analysis, governance. So governance just means leadership, decision making, right? So government, essentially. We are familiar with the word government. So BA has to plan how decisions will be made. The BA is not the one that will make decisions for the organization or for the stakeholders. the BA can advise. The BA's role. That's why business analysis is inside information systems. That's why we started by talking about information systems, right? And we said information systems have 5 components and all that. What the BA does is understand the information systems that they want to develop, right? And then provide advice to the key stakeholders on their options and the pros and cons, the benefits and costs of each of these options. You are not the one that will push your agenda or what you think is best. Okay? So that's why you are identifying the decision makers. Those are the people you go and talk to. You go and advise, and then they will decide. Okay. Then the next thing, or the next important aspect of planning is planning, business analysis, information management. So much information is going to be generated in business analysis, right? Yeah, in those strategy meetings, it's information. You're taking notes. You are working with stakeholders, eliciting their requirements. That's information. The BA is modeling, drawing something like Anderson did yesterday when he was talking to those stakeholders. He went to the board. That was something he did right. And he started drawing what he understood they were saying. And that helped them explain and understand each other better. That's modeling. Right? That is information. Everything the business analyst does is information. Information systems is a group of systems working together to generate information. So everything the business analyst will be doing is information. Meeting people, collecting requirements is collecting information. Designing something on the system is information. Creating work products, so like the assignment that we did, right? So many of you had to use Pestle, right, or Steeple to analyze things, to analyze a problem, to analyze a case. That is information, right? How will this information be managed? The business analyst has to plan it before starting to gather plenty information. The business analyst has to plan how we will manage information. Everything that the BA generates during business analysis is what we call business analysis information, business analysis information, BAI. BAI. Again, for those who will be doing certification, yes, these details are important. Most times, if you're working in an agile environment, no one is going to be asking you about BAI, right? Or any of those things. They are looking at your work products, and each work product has its own name, right? So it's either your model, your lo-fi, what's it called now? Wireframes, mockups, so lo-fi representation of a system and all those things, right? So each work product has its name, and people will naturally use those names. But as a business analyst, you should know that everything you are creating or collecting is business analysis information. So all the information that a business analyst elicits, creates, compile, disseminates, so including the emails you are sending, right? They are business analysis information. How will you manage this information? So that's what we'll be looking at here. The BA has to plan that out, right? The BA ideally would work towards structuring the information that they are collecting. The reason why you'll be structuring information is you want to make sure you can locate them. And we already talked about this when I was talking about how you would Yeah, I just mentioned it now. I said something about you look at how your organization is storing information, right? And you want to make sure you follow suit. You don't go outside their status quo, right? So that is important in this sense because you are collecting information. You want to structure it the way your organization is structured, except you have something better, right? Except you are bringing a better approach. But the whole reason behind that is you want to be able to find the information should you need it. And I gave an example of somebody coming to you to say, okay, why was this change requested? So a key stakeholder coming to ask those questions, who requested this change? Why? You should be able to go back to the document, right? Or to the information you have kept and say, this was who requested the change, and this was why they requested the change, and this was who approved that change, to show that it's not just you driving your own agenda, right? BAs have been let go or have been have been heavily criticized for pushing their agenda. People, stakeholders hate it when BAs push their agenda. So you want to structure information so it's not difficult to locate. It doesn't conflict, right? So if there are updated changes, if there's change one, change two, you don't want to overwrite the previous change. You want to make sure you are storing them so you can track or trace what is happening and you can explain it to anyone who is asking. All right. Then another thing a BA will be considering when managing information is the level of abstraction. I should mention, as we're discussing this organization and structuring information, that although it doesn't do too much harm, but it may just overcomplicate things if you have too much duplicates, if you just are so disorganized that you are storing the same information multiple times, right? That would just, it doesn't do your organization too much harm, since BAI are not usually heavy information per se. Maybe it's Word document, say you have two copies, but it just makes you disorganized and makes you look inefficient, right? So these are things you want to just be cognizant of. They don't do you harm. What is most important here is that you should organize information in the way that you can find it, and that any BA that takes over from you, you can pass on the knowledge of how you have stored information so they can locate those information in case there's an issue. Okay. So level of abstraction. I already talked about this to some extent yesterday. Some people want high level information. Some people want detailed information. So high level, summarized, and some people will want detailed information. And by people, I mean your stakeholders. You, as the BA, right, you have to determine that as part of your information management process. You have to determine who will get high level summarized information and who is getting low level summarized information based on the stakeholders' needs, not based on your own whims and caprices, not based on your own thinking or your own agenda, based on the stakeholders, right? That's why, again, it is important to do your stakeholder analysis, right? We talked about power, interest, greed, 1, 2, 3, 4. So who should we be informing? Who should we be encouraging to move to the right? Like, who are we trying to increase their interest? Who doesn't matter if they like our project or not, right? So with the RACI model to doing something similar for you. You want to know what level of information should I be providing to certain people? What level of detail should I be providing to other people, right? So these are part of the things a BA will be planning during the information management process. Then another thing or another concern for the BA is traceability. The BA many times will need to trace requirements, and we'll talk about tracing requirements in greater detail later when we get to requirement lifecycle management, right? So how you manage requirement throughout the solution development lifecycle. So we'll talk about tracing then in great detail. But what you should know about tracing is tracing requirement is trying to figure out the lineage of the requirement. So those of us who hail from somewhere in Africa, and I think most of us are Africans here, or yeah, to my knowledge, most of us are Africans. When you want to get married, it is customary for the people, right, family members, to go trace lineage. Even when you are running for political positions, right? They will go trace your lineage. They will say, who is this person's father in this town? Who is this person's father in this village or in this state? Right? They want to know the person's source. That is requirement traceability. When you say you want to know the requirement source, right? You want to know the father of the requirement. So where did this requirement come from? So you want to trace requirements from maybe the business need to the solution component that is implementing them. Meaning you are looking at the solution component, maybe it's a button, maybe it's a feature, upload. You want to know, how did this upload feature or function come about? What requirement did it come from? Who was the stakeholder who asked for this feature? Right? So that's tracing requirement. So a BA plans how they will trace requirement. So how will you store and organize? Because you're the one collecting all these requirements many times. So how will you store and organize the requirement in such a way that you can trace it from the source to the solution component that implements it? And if you need to trace it back, you can trace from the solution component to the source. You can trace the lineage of the requirement. Right? So you need to plan that. A BA needs to plan that. A BA also needs to plan for requirement reuse. There are some requirements that are sort of generic. They are reusable in the organization. Maybe you are new, and so it's your organization is embarking on a project that is novel, right? So there will be new requirements that you have never heard before. Fine, but there may be some requirements that are standard, boilerplate. For example, it may be compliance requirements, something about we want, there's this security standard that the organization follows, and so everything we produce must follow this security standard. So say you have gone to the information security person to elicit that requirement for this particular project you are working on. Once you get that kind of requirement, you realize that, oh, this is something that we will continue to follow, we'll continue to use. Then that kind of requirement, you want to store it specially. You want to store it for reuse, because you know that when you have another project, this requirement will be useful. You don't need to go back to that InfoSec person to bother them again about this requirement. It's still going to be useful. So you want to identify requirements that are reusable and store them specially for reuse. So it may be service level agreements, it may be business rules, business processes, quality standards, contractual obligations, regulatory requirements, right? So requirements describing something or a product that an enterprise is producing. So these may be requirements that are just templates, boilerplate. You can always use them. So you need to identify those types of requirements and store them as such so that you can easily reach them and you don't need to bother those stakeholders again after you have collected the requirement the first time. Then lastly, under planning, business analysis, information management, a BA must plan how he will store and how BAI, business analysis information, will be assessed. So how will BAI be stored? How will BAI be assessed? Who would have access to BAI? Right? So a BA must plan this. Where will we store business analysis information? So all these requirements I'm collecting, are they going to be on paper? Are they going to be in an Excel document? Are they going to be on the cloud? Does your organization have a particular requirement repository or repository, as my American friends would say, right? So does your organization have something like that, a requirement management system that you can use to store requirements? Right? Or are you responsible for looking for a solution, a place to store requirements? Right? So you have to decide, where will you store requirements? Right? Are there tools in your organization for storing requirements? Then you also have to decide, who would have access to these requirements? Right? So if you have colleagues, other BAs, senior BAs, fellow BAs, junior BAs, who would have access to requirements? What would they be able to do with the requirements in terms of, can they change requirements? Can they update requirements? Can they keep track of changes? Right? So you have to decide on all this before you embark on collecting the requirements. So these are some of the things a BA needs to plan. Now let's look at attributes of requirements. So attributes of requirement can be looked at as metadata, requirement, metadata. Meta, in this case, can just be looked at as something above, right? Above. So metadata will mean data about data. Right? So data about the data you are collecting. So you see, this meta is above the data you are collecting. So it's information about the information you are collecting. So requirements attributes are metadata. They are information about the requirement. An example will be the reference number of the requirement, or you say absolute reference. So it can be absolute, it can be relative, it doesn't matter. IIBA is using absolute reference, but reference number of your requirement. Why would your requirements need reference number? You want to be able to search for those requirements. You want to uniquely identify the requirement, especially if you are storing them in something like a database. You want to be able to uniquely identify, uniquely reference your requirement. So you may have something like requirement 1001, right? So this is data about your requirement. You want to have information about the author of the requirement. So who authored this requirement? You want to document that. In some cases, you want to keep information about the level of complexity of the requirement. Now, let me quickly mention that this is gold standard. This is recommended. You will be hard pressed to find an organization that will use all these attributes, all these requirement attributes. Most people just pick and choose the ones that are relevant to their business. Right? So some organizations may not use complexity, some others may use complexity. So, but I'm teaching you all this so that when you get out there, at least you know the attributes that exist, and you'll be able to figure out which ones your organization is using, and you can use it along with them. So requirements will usually have an author. They may have level of complexity. You may have, you may have an owner, right? So your requirement will have an owner. Which department owns this requirement? Which stakeholder owns the requirement? Right? So if we do this requirement, which stakeholder is it going to affect? Who are the people either leading or what's it called now? Who are the people that will be affected by the requirement? So it may be the sales department, it may be a particular stakeholder. What's the priority of this requirement? What's the level of risk? So organizations may have classification for levels of risk, right? So maybe low risk, mid-level, high. Some will use funny names, right? So people have different risk tolerance levels, and so organizations have different names for level of risk. It may be 3 levels, it may be 5, depending. And some organization will not even have this attribute in their list of requirement attributes for their requirements. So you want to know the source of the requirement, because sometimes the source of the requirement is not the owner of the requirement. So the person who brings the problem to your attention may not even be in the department that will benefit from the solution. So you want to note the source. You want to, in some cases, the stability of the requirement, right? Maybe you still need to do more work. You still need to better understand or consult some other stakeholders on that requirement. The status of the requirement, has it been approved? Is it a draft? Those kind of things you may want to keep. Urgency. So how quickly do we want to implement this requirement? So these are some of the attributes. This list is not exhaustive, but at the same time, many organizations don't use all of this. They just pick some. So this provides information about each requirement. So a requirement may be, we want a website that can talk to our customers. That may be our requirement. But who wrote that requirement down? Is it Andrew that took the requirement from the stakeholder and wrote it down? You have to write the person's name. Maybe there's a level of complexity. Maybe that's a very highly complex requirement. Who owns the requirement? So who wants the website that can talk? Is it the marketing department? Is it sales? Right? What's the priority of that requirement? Maybe very low. What's the level of risk? Right? So you document all that. So in doing this, you have information about the requirement. Okay. So if you need further clarification, who was the source of the requirement? Maybe it's Wale that told us about this website that can talk. Right? So he told Andrew. Andrew was the BA collecting requirement, and Wale was the one who told him. Now, imagine you are doing a meeting where you had 50 stakeholders present and you elicit it. So that's a workshop, right? So learn to use the word workshop when there's a purpose, a defined purpose to the meeting, and that purpose has to do mainly with eliciting requirements or clarifying something. So any meeting where the BA is leading it, there's a purpose. It's usually a workshop. So rather than say meeting, sometimes when you see that you want to describe a meeting you led, right, to do something, say, oh, I held a workshop to do this, rather than say meeting. Okay. So maybe Andrew led a workshop and he elicited this requirement and he had 50 stakeholders. If he did not keep information about the source, let's say he now comes back to the department and I'm there and I say, so are you saying someone asked for a website that can talk? Okay. What language will the website speak? And Andrew says, well, you know what? I didn't ask that question. Okay. So go back and ask, who will Andrew go to meet if he did not keep a record of the source? And he had 50 stakeholders there. See, that's why it's important to keep these attributes information, this metadata information about the requirement. Okay. So lastly, the business analyst has to identify business analysis performance improvement. The business analyst has to identify business analysis performance improvement. So we've covered stakeholder engagement. We covered BA approach. This is BA approach, stakeholder engagement. We've talked about governance today. We talked about information management. Now we'll look at how a business analyst will ensure performance improvement. Now, before we go into this, I want to mention something. There's a popular business saying, what you cannot measure, you cannot improve. What you can't measure, you can't improve. It's a popular business saying, attributed to two people, so we don't know the exact person that said it. But the saying holds. It has value. What you can't measure, you can't improve. So in talking about performance improvement, you have to first be able to measure performance. How do you measure the performance of business analysis work? That's what we're considering here. That's why this knowledge area is called planning and monitoring. The monitoring part is you monitoring BA activities to measure them and to improve upon them. Okay? So identifying business analysis performance improvement means you want to assess business analysis work and plan to improve processes where required. So you want to assess, measure business analysis work, then improve them where required. Performance analysis, or analyzing or measuring performance, is something you will do throughout. Okay, something you do throughout. And once you identify an area where change, where improvement can occur, in the next leg of your operation, the next iteration or the next increment or the next phase, you need to implement those changes. You need to implement those improvements. Okay, so it's something you continue to do throughout. In your strategy phase, you think about what did we do right? What did we do wrong? What should we have improved? As in your conception phase. You're doing planning. What did we get well in our last planning? What didn't we do well? How can we improve it? You're doing requirement elicitation, right? What have we done well? What are we not doing well? How can we improve? So that the next time you're eliciting requirements, you immediately improve. In some cases, lessons learned in one phase can apply to another phase. Or maybe we didn't listen well in the what's it called, strategy phase. Then let's listen very, very well in the elicitation phase, right? So how are business analysis efforts assessed? How do you measure performance? Well, many times organizations already have how they measure performance, right? So they have good HR teams, they have key performance indicators, KPIs, that they would use to measure the performance of staff. Well, sometimes in companies, right, the BA may be responsible or maybe in those meetings where they are deciding on how to measure performance of different activities. So if the BA is there, most times they'll be deciding on how to measure performance of other people. Maybe you have assigned tasks to some people, maybe developers, and they are responsible. So you want to measure their performance. Those are business analysis activities too, right? So developers are developing what you've asked them to do. The designers are designing what you have asked them to design. You want to measure their performance. But what the BA should also know is that behind the scene, there's a meeting about you too, where they have decided on how to measure your own performance. So as you are meeting on measuring the other people, there's a meeting in the other room where they have decided to measure your performance and how they want to measure it. So ways they can measure performance will be due dates, right? So if you are looking at this, and you should be looking at this with the sense of, okay, I may be responsible, I may be in that space where we would have to measure performance of other stakeholders, right? Your developers, your designers, your testers, and all that. You can use deliverable due dates, because you would have specified a plan, you would have asked them how long things will take, and you'll have documented it in your work breakdown structure. So if they are not delivering based on the due date, you can use that as a way to measure whether they are doing well or not. You can look at frequency of changes to business analysis work product. This metric can also be used for you or against you, right? So your line manager, as it's usually called, right? Your line manager if you're in the UK especially, right? Or whoever your supervisor is, can use this metric to measure the quality of work you are doing too. So how much changes do they need to make to your own work? So that's why it makes sense to, use your work breakdown structure, give yourself time, ask every stakeholder you need to ask questions, and do your work well. Because this can be a KPI, a key performance indicator for you, where your supervisor is documenting how much changes do we need to make when you do work? How many times do we need to review your work? How efficient are you? Right? Then they may talk to other stakeholders you are working with to see, to get qualitative feedback. So they may ask other stakeholders or your peers, what do you think about this person? Right? What do you think about this person? That's why it's good to work with your peers. Right? So they may ask your peers, what do you think about this person? Blah, 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 and ask questions from them and use that to review your performance. So maybe other BAs, it may be anybody that is on your team. Are you a team player? So let's drive home these performance measurements home. Let's drive it home. So assessment measures, ways you can be measured and ways you can measure business analysis activities. Again, this can be used to measure you, and these are things you can use to measure other people that you have given responsibility to perform tasks, right? So accuracy and completeness. When you give them tasks, is it correct? Do they do the correct thing? Is it complete? Do they cover everything? Knowledge. So their level of knowledge, are they skilled or not? Right. So that can be something that will be considered. Right. Is this person skilled or not? One second. Effectiveness. How easy is it to use their work product? When they write, do we understand? Simple things like that, right? So can we look at their work product when they write requirements? Is it clear for everybody to understand? Can we look at their work product and easily use it? Or do we have to call them every time to come and explain? You can also, as a BA, be responsible for measuring the amount of organizational support that you're getting on activities. So do you have adequate resources? Is the PM giving you enough time, enough money, enough human capacity to do your task, to carry out your objective, so you can also measure performance that way? Significance. What is the significance of the tasks this person carries out? Do they justify the things they are doing well enough? Right. That's why I taught you about work breakdown structures. If you're asking for time, you justify it, right? Break down your work. Same things. If you are suggesting change, if you are recommending things, can you justify? Do you meet objectives? Are you strategic? Are you able to prioritize and figure out what's important and do those things? Are you meeting your objectives? Timeliness. Are you timely or not? So some organizations, again, will have their KPIs already from maybe the HR team. Some, especially for software companies or companies that are very, very into development, it may be for a quarter, it may be for a year. At the beginning of a phase, maybe a new year, they'll sit down and come up with, okay, how should we measure effectiveness? How should we measure performance this quarter or this year? And they'll decide, okay, let's use timeliness. So if timeliness is important in your organization, right? If timeliness is important and you know timeliness is important, then you work towards timeliness. Unfortunately, many times you may not know if you don't ask. So this is a key question you can ask when you are on the job. You can ask your supervisor, what are the KPIs here? How do you measure my performance? Like, what is most important to us? If what is most important to your organization is qualitative feedback from peers about how good you are and how well you're working with them, and you focus on timeliness to the detriment of relationship with your peers, you see that there may be issues. Right? So you need to know where you are. Ask questions. You're a BA, your job is to be asking questions. Don't assume anything. Okay? And that's how you measure performance. And that's how your performance will be measured too. And when you get the results, right, you try and use those results to improve the next iteration. So if you find that this time in this phase or in this, for this particular increment, this iteration, we're too slow, or out of all the BAs doing similar tasks, you were too slow, then you know that you should work towards improving your speed in the next iteration. So if you figure out that you are not being effective, maybe your communication is not effective, then you know you should work on communication and strive to improve your communication, your effectiveness. Right? And again, this may be something you would use as a lens to view other stakeholders, those who you are making responsible and accountable for tasks. You want to see, how are they measuring up on all these metrics or some of these metrics, depending on the ones your organization is using. And you want to step in to figure out what is wrong, what is the root cause of their problems, right? And try to help them fix it in the next iteration so that things can get better and better till the project comes to its natural end. Okay. So these are the things a BA needs to plan for. BA should plan the business analysis approach they want to take. They should plan how they will engage with stakeholders. Okay. They should plan how they will engage with stakeholders. They should plan governance. How will decisions be made concerning this project? If there are issues, who would I go to? They should plan information management. How will I store information that I'm collecting? If everything I'm going to be doing, I'm around information. I'm talking to people, is information. I'm sending emails, is information. I'm eliciting requirements, they are important information. So how will I organize this information? How will I structure them? How will I make sure I can easily find them? Where will I store them? Do we have resources for that in this organization? So a BA should plan that already. And lastly, a BA should understand how performance will be measured so that they can ensure that performance is improving with each task they are taking on or each phase of a task. Any question? Any question?
No.
Okay, so let me stop recording.